I want to thank a number of people before we get started today. Ann Archer for one. Ann Archer is the one who's put together all these programs over the last 7, 8 years here. And Ann's over here, I hadn't even want to stand and let people see it. And then Whitney Woodruff, who's just about to go out the door here. Without Whitney, nothing could happen here because she does the hearing, the stools, the stand, everything just right when Whitney finishes. And then Clay Motley over here, Clay has been videotaping the series, and we're sort of thankful to him. And then who is it that came and gave us a hand last time? The other fellow in the theater.
Jordan. Jordan.
Okay, all right. Well, and certainly, last but not least, I want to thank Nancy Bain, who plays the piano for these little ditties that we sing. So let's go ahead and sing it. If you'll come along with me, we're going to class to study history. We may not get from A to Z, but we shall see what we shall see, right? Okay, here we go. If you will come along with me, we're going to class to study history. We may not get from A to Z, but we shall see what we shall see. All right, very good. There's only one other song that we haven't sung. It's on the back of your song sheet. We're really not going to get that far, but I thought we'd have a song about the end of the Middle Ages. The end of the Middle Ages, medieval civilization doesn't really break up until the early 14th century. In fact, the other Renaissance begins with Petrarch, Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, and so the medieval civilization is beginning to unravel about the early 14th century. And so this song, though, is about the early 13th century. The most powerful of all of the medieval popes is Pope Innocent III. And Innocent III brings medieval Christendom to its height in terms of papal power. He will have every emperor, every king, every ruling power in Europe under his hand. You say, how in the world did he do this without an army? That little Swiss guard couldn't possibly do that kind of thing for him, but he uses all of the sanctions that have been developed over the centuries that the church used to bring people into subjection. People at all levels, I mean, from the emperor, the kings, and all the rest of them. But anyway, the tune is to the tune of In Old New York. You want to play that, Nancy, so everybody can hear the tune? And it's on the back of your sheet. Medieval history, the last song. All right, some of you haven't brought this, and so that handicaps you a little bit. All right, what do you think? Can we do it? Let's try. Medieval history meets its peak with Pope Innocent III. He dominated with King John and gave all the emperors the word. But peace and veils are often close, as you will clearly see. The whole earth came crashing down, so let it be. That's it. And that's what happens. And at the end of today's lecture, departure, I'll give you a quote from a famous medieval historian who explains what happened in just a very short paragraph. All right, we're going to look at a number of things today. We're going to look at literature, and we're going to look at drama, and we're going to look at mysticism, and poetry, beauty, art. I'm going to get all of that in the next 50 minutes or not, but we'll give it a try. Medieval literature is divided into two major categories in the 12th century. The two categories are one, Latin literature, and the other is vernacular literature. Latin literature and vernacular literature. Well, Latin's been around for a long time in the Middle Ages. You all know. But classical Latin had declined significantly after the 5th or 6th century, all the invasions, and then the invaders kept coming back century after century until the early 11th century. Finally, peace came to Western Europe, and the population grew rapidly, and so and then cities began to pop up, and industry and commerce and banking and all of that, which precipitated this acceleration of cultural change that happens in the 12th century that Charles Sumner Haskins aptly calls the Renaissance of the 12th century. The Renaissance of the 12th century. So Latin's been around, it's deteriorated badly, and people speak kind of diminished form of Latin in the newly developed towns and in the 12th century. And so there are several new things that pop up so far as Latin is concerned. Two of the finest hymns that were ever written were written in the 12th century. One of them is the very frightening Dies Irae, the Day of Wrath, and that song was written by a man named Thomas D. Solano in the early 12th century, and it becomes a part of the Mass. And is that part of the Mass in which you are threatened with eternal damnation. And Dies Irae aptly describes it. Verdi, Mozart, Dvorak have all got masses in which you can hear them sing Dies Irae, Dies Irae, but it kind of knocks you over your seat. It's a 12th century Latin song, a new thing. And another song, one that some modern hymn writers has called the finest hymn ever written. And I know you wouldn't think of it, this 12th century, really almost at the end of the 12th century, beginning of the 13th century, is a hymn by a man named Jacopone di Toto. Todi, rather, D-E, and then capital T-O-D-I, and the name of the hymn is Stabat Mater, Stabat Mater, and it's the word standing at the cross, and it's about the Virgin Mary standing at the foot of the cross and seeing her son in agony on the cross, and a very, very moving hymn. And it's sung many times in solemn, sacred gatherings of the church. Two of the great songs, and then you have the mystical songwriters in the 12th century, people like Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard of Clairvaux, we've run into him several times in this course. Bernard of Clairvaux, if you'll recall, was the one who prosecuted Abelard for heresy on the Holy Trinity as well as other things. Abelard simply couldn't keep his pen still or his mouth shut. The result is he kept writing things that irritated orthodoxy in the 12th century. I just talked to you about his book on the Trinity early in his career, but then later on in his career, even before he was officially silenced by the church in 1140, he had written 3 more books. One of them was called Know Yourself, in Latin, Scito Te Ipsum. And in that book, he poses a whole series of questions, very, very serious matter, the kinds of things that students were asking when they went to the cathedral schools that developed into the university in the 12th century. But one of the things about it is that he would ask the questions, and then he wouldn't give any answers. And his students asked him, well, how come you don't give the answers to these questions? And he said, because I don't want to short-circuit your pursuit of the answers. They say, yes, but you're creating doubts about things that we've held to be true for much of our lives. And he said, well, that's all right, because my doubting, this is a very famous quote from Skeeton. I'm sorry, I'm giving you the wrong title. That's the second book I'm going to talk about. The name of this book is simply Seek and Know, Yes and No is the title of the book that I'm talking about right now. Seek and Know, Yes and No. And so what he's done, he's assembled all these quotations and asked all these questions. The quotations are from church councils and popes and many solemn assemblies, but he doesn't give the answer to them. And so in the book he says, the reason that I don't give you the answers is that by doubting you are led to questioning, and by questioning you are led to the truth. A very famous statement. But Bernard of Clairvaux saw it as an attempt to tear up the consensus that had existed for a long time in the Middle Ages on all of these questions. The other book, Scito Te Ipsum, title, that means know yourself, as I said already. And in it, he takes issue with the whole ethical system of the Roman Catholic Church. And instead of what it was called prescriptive ethics, in which the church sets out sort of 10 commandments, everything's very clear. Do not or do this, and everything is stated very clearly by the popes, by church councils, and you simply accept that on the basis of authority and tradition. And Abelard says, no, you got to think things out for yourself. Sometimes even a thing which seems to be right may be wrong if you do it at a certain time or in a certain condition. And so you have to, nobody sins, he says, unless they intend to do so. This is too much. And then to cap it off, his final writing is a book called a dialogue between a Christian, a philosopher, and a Jew. A dialogue between a Christian, a philosopher, and a Jew. And each one attempts to persuade the other that his particular religious view is the correct one. And each fails to convert the other to that person's point of view. And Ablard's conclusion is that each person's religion is the right religion for that person. So you can imagine what bombshells these kinds of writings were in the 12th century by Peter Abelard. Now, Bernard of Clairvaux really kind of got off the main subject there, but Bernard of Clairvaux, in addition to defending orthodoxy against people like Peter Abelard, was a mystical, a writer, a very mystical man. That is, one who sought direct contact with the divine. If the sacraments helped, if church doctrine helps, well and good. But the main point is, how can the spirit of a human being merge with the spirit of the divine? And that's what Peter, one of the things he became a great champion of devotion to the Virgin Mary, the Marian cult of the 12th century. And so one of the ways was asking the Virgin Mary to grant help to bring him closer to the divine, to merge his spirit with the divine spirit. And he wrote a number of hymns which show a very personal relationship to, at least to Christ as the pathway to God. He wrote a hymn called Jesus, the Very Thought of Thee. It's a hymn that we don't sing Stabat Mater or Dies Irae in most of our church services, but we do sing that hymn, Jesus, the Very Thought of Thee. And then his other hymn to the crucifixion of Christ, O sacred head, now wounded with grief and shame weighed down. And the last verse, or stanza, I guess I should say, the last stanza of that hymn is one of the greatest lines, in my opinion anyway. What language shall I borrow to thank thee, dearest friend, for this thy dying sorrow, for pity without end? Oh, make me thine forever, and should I fainting be, oh, let me never, never outlive my love to thee. This is the kind of thinking that Bernard of Clairvaux engaged in. One of the greatest women of the 12th century, she's born in 1098 and died in, I think it was 1179. Her name was Hildegard of Bingen. Bingen is a little town between Mainz and Trier on the Rhine River. She's one of the so-called Rhineland mystics. Mysticism was breaking out all over the place in the 12th century, and historians have wondered why. What is it about this Renaissance of the 12th century? What is about this acceleration of cultural change that seemed to have produced a lot of mystics, in particular among women, but there were men who were mystics. I just mentioned Bernard of Clairvaux as an example, but women in particular. There were women all around. Most of them appear mainly in the 13th century, but Hildegard of Bingen is directly in our age. And I think the answer is that there's something about cultural advance, something about significant change taking place in a society that causes people to think in terms of do we need all the structure? Do we need all of these dogmas? Do we need, is there not some way in which an individual human being can reach the divine and experience the blessings of that kind of merger of spirit, human spirit and divine spirit? If we can cut all the red tape and go directly to the source, as it were. And that's what these mystics will attempt to do. The Hildegard of Bingen is reared in a monastery. In fact, she was the 10th of the 10th child, and there was a kind of an unwritten rule in the Middle Ages that if you were the 10th child, and people had a lot of children in those days, but if you were the 10th child, you were like the tithe, the 10th child, you were devoted to God particularly. And so right away, Hildegard's parents put her into a convent, and she grew up in a convent, and soon became an abbess of convent, and then founded her own convent when she was about 40 years old. Her convent was the Bingen, that small town on the Rhine River. and she comes to be known as Hildegard of Bingen. When she's 40 years old, she tells us that she experienced a burning white light that filled her entire being, that there was nothing that she could do to stop it. It invaded her entire being, and finally, after some hours, the light passed, and she was aware that she would now have an ability that she had lacked before she had experienced this light. And the ability was to understand the Psalms and the prophets and writings of the Old Testament as well as New Testament writings. Things became clear to her. And she began to teach and preach later on. In fact, when she was 60 years old, she undertook a preaching tour. And for 12 years, she left the convent. She wasn't supposed to do that because you're supposed to you go into convent, you stay in the convent your entire life. But she left the convent and she preached. And she just went from village to village trying to reform the church that where it needed reformation. She wrote a book entitled, the Latin title of it was Scivias, S-C-I-V-I-A-S, which means know the way. Know, K-N-O-W, know the way. And the book recorded her visions, told them, just related them in a very careful way. She was highly intelligent, well-educated, and a remarkable person in every way. She was interested in so many different things. She was a great gardener. She was an astronomer. She was a chemist. She was a musician. She wrote 77 songs and 77 hymns. And she had some interesting things to say. And it's sort of like Martin Luther. Remember Martin Luther said that you should never trust anybody who doesn't like music. I think that Hildegard is much the same. She described music as a swaying bridge between earth and heaven. A swaying bridge between earth and heaven.
What was her last name? What was her last name? Hildegard what?
Okay.
Last name.
Somebody was asking, am I here?
Hildegard's last name. Her last name.
Hildegard?
Hildegard.
I don't know her last name. Do you know her last name?
Yeah.
No, she always appears in the books as Hildegard of Bingen. I can't think of her parents' name right now, but she does have a last name. But if you're really interested to know it, I'll give it to you a little later on. Okay. She described. I told you she described music as a swaying bridge between earth and heaven. And she said that when she sang, it was like the feeling of a feather on the breath of God. That when she sang, she had the sense that it was like a feather on the breath of God. So really fine. And then when she got into trouble with the Orthodox Catholic Church of her day, a young count who had violated some of the strictures and dogmas of the church was excommunicated by the church, and after he died, Hildegard of Bingen, who knew the man personally and knew his character, buried him in the cemetery in the convent and when the bishops and the abbots found that she'd done this, they came down pretty hard on her, and for a while it looked as if she was going to be excommunicated herself, but she finally made peace with the authorities. Died peacefully in I think I said 79. Well, Hildegard of Bingen, an outstanding figure, a woman of the 12th century. Well, you've got them, that form of Latin literature, very, very sacred, very solemn, but then you have a whole genre of other Latin literature. It's the literature that was written by or written for them to sing in the taverns when they go to drink and to let off a little steam after listening to the lectures in theology at the University, say, of Paris. So this is the music of the wandering students. The music is called, and the literature, the lyrics accompany it, are called the Goliardic materials. Golias, G-O-L-I-A-S, was a medieval name for the devil. So it's associated with Goliath in the Old Testament, the feeling that the Goliath and the devil were somehow or another going hand in hand. And this music was really, most of it was written by two professional writers, a man in the court of Frederick I, Frederick Barbarossa. He's simply called the arch poet of Cologne, the arch poet of Cologne. He wrote a number of these Goliardic tunes and lyrics. Whether he wrote the tunes, I'm not sure. And then there's another writer, the Primate, P-R-I-M-A-T-E, and he was from Tours, in southern France. These were professional writers of these Goliardic tunes. And I'll give you an example if I can get turned around here. When I stand like this, it takes me a minute to get going. I'll give you a sample of this one is the Confession of Goliath. And I think it's a real long poem, so I can't give you the whole thing. But it's like the Confessions of Goliath, and of course this is translated from the German into English. The opening verse is, like a hapless ship I fare, left without a sailor, like a bird on waves of air, some poor lost cloud scaler. Not a jot for chains I care, nor for key nor jailer. Sinful flesh is frail, I swear. Mine's the same, but frailer. Well, he says that sobriety he doesn't like. He says he likes to go places where the jokes are funny and where society is loose. And how does he end up? He says, hear me, prelate, that is the priest, hear me, prelate, most discreet, for indulgence crying, deadly sin I find so sweet, I'm in love with dying. Every pretty girl I see sets my heart aside. Hands off, but in conceit, in her arms I'm lying. So here are people who seem to be totally the opposite from the serious sacred writings or the mystics that we were talking about a moment ago. He's got a very short one here. This one is written by the Primate. This is by the French Goliardic poet. It's called Time for Gladness. Time for gladness. Time for gladness. Time for play. Holiday we keep today. Let the fiddle sound the strain. Sing the good old songs again. Hearts must beat in time with voices till the dancing blood rejoices. Come, you scholars, most of all, who best love a festival. Pen and ink and copy book, how funereal they look. Ovid's song, Ovid, the famous Latin poet in the 1st century, Ovid's songs, how dull with age, still more any other's page. Never mind what's not allowed. Love is youth's temptation. Here we go, a glorious crowd, hell bent for vacation. Sounds like something that the kids could sing headed off to Florida from Northern University. The last one, which is about drinking in the tavern. The fellow who writes this poem is expecting that somebody else is going to pay for all the drinks he has at the end, but he finds to his shock that it doesn't work out that way. But it's a long list of people drinking. Just an example. First we throw around to settle who will pay, like men of metal. Next we drink to captives, then we drink to living men. Fourth we drink to Christians truly bred. Fifth we cheer the faithful dead. On it goes, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to wonders by the way. And at last to king and pope, we all inordinately tope. Hosts and hostess, he drinks, she drinks. Even the parson on a spree drinks. The captain drinks or drinks alone. The tapster drinks with Greasy Joan. And on it goes. And they'll finally get to the end of it. And at the end of it, they drink the poor man ill at ease, the no account gone overseas. They drink the boy, the reverend man, prelate and dean both drink the can. They drink the sister and the brother. They drink old maid and mother. What hundreds say, what thousands think, drink, 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 drink. That's the point, get enough of the drink. But it ends with, to quench their thirst, what would avail 100 mugs of penny ale, when all are drinking without measure, and all in drinking had their pleasure. Whoever treats these thirsty folk by morning will be stony broke. They sponge on us, we treat, not much. Good fellows, listen, this is Dutch. So everybody pays for his own drink. Well, I mean, that's kind of a fun stuff when the students are not in class studying very serious things or in church listening to a priest give a homily, they are in the tavern and singing some of the songs that they've written for them. The Scholastic literature is all in Latin because the students, one of the ways in which you can enter cathedral school at a university, you have to be able to speak Latin. And so these are Latin poems characteristic of the 12th century to entertain the students. Well, so the first big category of literature in the 12th century is the Latin literature, as you see evidence in some of the examples that are given. But the most famous of all of the literature and the most revolutionary of the literature is the vernacular literature that appears in the 12th century. Such literature, I mean, it's one of the really novel things of the 12th century. It's very different. I mean, Latin's been around for a long time. Not too surprising that people write new things in Latin in the 12th century, which I'll give you examples of. But vernacular is just coming into being. That is, there are no. England is not a country yet. France is not a country in the 12th century. Germany is not a country. These are simply areas. France is not a country. Nation states are a thing that will develop in the centuries following the 12th century. 1314, during the other Renaissance, you begin to get the development of the nation states. But you already begin to have characteristics of developments that will define nation states at a later time. And one of the things that defines a nation state is the people speaking a similar language within a various geographical area. And so we call this people speaking in the vernacular, people speaking in the vernacular. There are three major categories of the vernacular that emerge in the 12th century. I'll give them to you. One is the songs of great deeds, or in French it's called the chanson de geste, C-H-A-N-S-O-N-S, D-E-G-E-S-T-E, the chansons de geste, songs of great deeds. And then the second category are the troubadour lyrics. The troubadour lyrics is the third category of vernacular literature that emerges in the 12th century and helps define the 12th century Renaissance, is the adventure romances. The adventure romances, among which are going to be the Arthurian tales. I'll get to that in a minute, but just while I'm thinking of it, the English historian who gives rise to the Arthurian tales is a writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey of Monmouth, and Geoffrey of Monmouth will write a book, History of the Kings of Britain. History of the Kings of Britain, and it's in that book that Arthur, the genius or the kernel of the Arthurian tales begins. Then there are many people who will take what Geoffrey says and expand on it, I could say almost sensationally. So you get people like Chrétien de Troyes, who will write the story of Lancelot, and once you take off there, then you get into not history but fantasy. In fact, there are those who still can't believe that Arthur is anything but fancy, and that he did not exist as a historical figure. But in any event, the three categories of the chansons de geste, the songs of great deed. These are the songs that are sung in the courts of the great landed aristocrats in Europe. You understand, I'm sure most of you do, what I'm happy to tell you, is that there are just a small percentage of people who are engaged in the kind of literature that I've been talking about. I mean, the people on the streets, the people in the countryside, the great masses of people, the people who work the fields and furnish the food to feed the clergy and the aristocracy, the landed aristocracy. I mean, they're not participants in this higher culture, and they would not be familiar with any of these Latin. I mean, they may have heard the tunes of Stabat Mater and D-A-C-R-I, but they would not have the kind of understanding of them that the aristocracy. Later on, when the towns develop significantly, townsmen will become more and more educated and will be able to read and understand some of these things, but the peasants almost never become a part of this higher culture that is developed. But the chansons de geste are the kinds of stories that the great nobles want to hear. They're about military, they're about great heroes. The oldest one of them that came in the what's the Scandinavian poem. Anyway, in the 8th century. But then these circulate orally for several years. But then they're written down in the 12th century, and one of the greatest is the Song of Roland. The Song of Roland. Again, it's French, chanson de Roland. It would be the French sound of it. And of course, it's based on a historical event, but it is highly elaborated when, by the time that it's written down. I don't think that the people who would have been at Rossevaux, which is that area where the battle between the rear guard of Charlemagne's army and the Muslims who were in northern Spain and in southern France. Rossevaux is a mountain pass between southern France and Spain, and that's where the battle that Roland and his men, and Roland, of course, the idea is loyalty to one's lord, and of course the lord in this case is Charlemagne. And of course, Charlemagne lived back in the 8th century, and this story is not written down until the 12th century. But it glorified the loyalty of Roland, I mean, loyalty to death. He refuses to blow that horn, you remember, and to summon Charlemagne to bring troops back to help him out against what, in the story, hundreds of thousands of Moslem soldiers. Well, there weren't that many by any means, but once this thing is written down and is finally sung, it will have such dimensions. But Song of Roland, and then in Spain, El Cid again was a historical figure, but by the time El Cid is written down and sung before the lords in the courts of Spain, Castile, for instance, that's where El Cid is from. It has taken on dimensions that you couldn't imagine. There's two of the greatest of the songs of great deeds. The troubadour lyrics, the second major category of vernacular, what happens is that in the 1090s, as you know, we've already looked at the Crusades, many of the great nobles of Europe left and went on crusades, that is, the lords of the castle. And so the women were left in the estates, or in the castles. And the troubadours who had come earlier to sing songs of great deeds and heroism and almost Superman, Batman-like capabilities in their stories or songs of great deeds. The men are gone now. And the women don't want to hear all that stuff about great deeds and what the men have done on the battlefield. And the troubadours find that they're going to have to improvise. They're going to have to do something different than they've been doing. They're going to have to write different songs. And they began to write songs that glorified the beauty and the virtues of the women in the castle. And so a whole new genre of literature is written in the various languages of Western Europe, and all over Western England and France and the Germanys and Italy and so on. These are the troubadour lyrics in which the troubadours are men who come to sing and recite and to entertain and amuse the people in the landowners, the aristocratic landowners. They've had to adapt so that that music is appreciated by a feminine rather than a masculine audience. The third category, adventure romances. The adventure romances will crop up and reflect really what's going on in different parts of Europe. You have what's called the Carolingian cycle, in which people will write songs and sing them in courts about Charlemagne. And Charlemagne was highly esteemed, the first of the emperors after the breakup of Europe and the Germanic invasions in the 5th and 6th centuries. And Charlemagne puts things back together again, and certainly doesn't develop an empire that would have matched ancient Rome or even later Holy Roman emperors in Western Europe. But Charlemagne's life and times are celebrated in what's called the Carolingian cycle. Then there's the Antonian cycle, Otto, first Holy Roman Emperor in 968. And so you got these different cycles, and then you have the Arthurian cycle, and that becomes the most popular of all of the cycles. And so all the stories about King Arthur and Queen Guinevere and Lancelot. I mean, if you read some of these, I mean, you say, well, how can these things written back in the 12th century hold anybody's attention in the present time? Well, I can only say to you, let's try reading one, and I think you'll find. Say, for instance, if you read Lancelot, read the lyrics of that song that was sung, and you can't put it down until you get to the very end of it and see whether or not Guinevere, he found Guinevere. I mean, it's not easy. One of the most famous of these adventure romances doesn't fit any of the cycles, but there are those that are called the independent adventure romances. And the most famous of those is one called Aucassin and Nicolette. Have any of you familiar with Aucassin and Nicolette? Well, that's one that if you read it, you will, I guarantee you'll stay with it until you get to the very end. And Aucassin is a French, the son of a French count, and he's set upon by, that is, his father is set upon by a neighboring noble who is pretty well defeated the forces of Aucassin's father, and the father, the reason that they're being defeated is because almost like at Troy in the Trojan War, when guys lay out because they're miffed over something, and Aucassin is miffed because the father will not allow him to see, or certainly not marry, which he wants to do, a young woman who'd been captured in the raids of a captain in Aucassin's state, who had been captured in a raid on North Africa. Her name is Nicolette. Apparently one very, very beautiful women, and so Aucassin says, I'm not fighting unless you let me have Nicolette. And his father resists very strongly, and one thing, it's a real long story, and it's written in a very interesting style. It has a long section of prose, and then it will stop, and then there'll be a section of poetry. And then after the section of poetry, you go back to the prose again. And each time it makes that kind of transition. It has the words. It says, "So say they, speak they, tell they the tale." You have that repeated again and again in Aucassin and Nicolette. You have the poetry, and then this is right at the beginning of it. Who would listen to this good lay, brightness of the captive grey? 'Tis how two young lovers met, Aucassin and Nicolette. It's hard to imagine, rhyming, how this rhymed in French, but this is how it rhymes in English. Of the pains the lovers bore, and the sorrows he outbore, for the goodness and the grace of his love so fair of face. So say they, speak they, tell they the tale. And then, so you get a period of prose, and then you get poetry. The captain of his father's military force is trying to encourage Nicolette to get with it. Threatens Nicolette, he says, I don't mean Nicolette, Aucassin, threatens Aucassin with hell. He says, well, if you keep down the path you're going to end up in hell. And this is what he responds to that. He says, for into paradise, he says, I don't worry that much about hell, and missing paradise, he says, Why would I go to paradise? Because in paradise, and this is the prose section, in paradise, no one but such folks as I shall tell thee now. I mean, can you imagine, those of you who are really yearning for heaven, think of it in these terms. Thither go these same old priests and lame old men and maimed, who all day and night cower continually before the altars and in the crypts, and such folks as wear old amices and old clouded frocks, and naked folks and shoeless and covered with sores, perishing of hunger and thirst and of cold and of little ease. These are they who go into paradise. With them I do have no reason to join them. But into hell would I happily go, for into hell fare the goodly clerks, the goodly knights that fall in tourneys and great wars, and stout men at arms, and all men noble. With these would I gladly go, and thither pass the sweet ladies and courteous that have 2 lovers or 3, and those lords also there too. Thither goes the gold and the silver and the cloth of vair, and cloth of grit, and the harpers and makers and the princes of this world. With these I would gladly go. Let me but have with me Nicolette, my sweet lady. So he's willing to, I mean, hell is much more interesting to him than to go to heaven. I don't want to spoil it for you in case you were planning to go shortly after election today to read Aucassin and Nicolette, but I will give you the last line. After much travail, he and Nicolette finally get together. And when he finally sees her after all these years and all the trials and tribulations trying to find her, here's in poetry as the poem Aucassin and Nicolette ends. When Aucassin heareth now that his lady bright of brow dwelleth in his own country, never man was glad as he. To her castle doth he hie, with the lady speedily, okay. Passeth to the chamber high, findeth Nicolette thereby. Of her true love found again, never maid was half so fain. Straight she leaped upon her feet, when his love he saw at last. Arms about her did he cast, kissed her often, kissed her sweet, kissed her lips and brows and eyes, thus all night do they devise, even till the morning white. Then Aucassin wedded her, a little late, made her lady of Kilcare. Many years abode they there, many years in shade or sun, in great gladness and delight. There hath Aucassin regret, nor his lady Nicolette. Now my story is all sung, all done, said and sung. That's the way Aucassin and Nicolette had sung. Well, these are 3 of the great forms of vernacular literature in the 12th century. Moving quickly to drama. Drama in ancient Greece was associated with religion. In ancient Greece, the great dramatists, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus, and all the great Greek playwrights, religion and the stage were tied tightly together. And this is true in the origin of the drama in the 12th century. Actually, it comes out of a section of the Easter Mass, a section where in Latin the angel says to the women who come to the tombs, quem queritus, who do you seek? So what happened in the church, in the 12th century, because of the many people who couldn't read, couldn't understand what they read, and so the idea is to act out what happened. And of course, somebody plays the angels, somebody's were all priests in the church. And so when people come to church on Easter, they will see acted out the various aspects of the gospel. And so at first, I say the priests will simply perform these. There are three kinds of drama that are emerged in the 12th century. One are what's called the mystery plays, and secondly the miracle plays, and the third are the morality plays. So mystery, miracle, and morality plays. The mystery plays are plays put on about biblical subjects, Old Testament, New Testament. The miracle plays are about the life of Christ and the saints, the life of Christ and the saints. And the morality plays are allegorical plays. One of the most famous is a long play called Everyman, in which the whole idea is to try to show you the dangers of the 7 deadly sins and the importance of acquiring and living out the 7 godly virtues and in the morality plays. In the mystery plays, the plays of the Old Testament, they soon move outside of the church and onto the streets. And the wagon that is divided into 3 stories. I mean, the wagon is designed with hell on the first level, and then the earth in the middle, and then heaven on the highest level. And the name of the wagon, the French word for wagon is pagond, P-A-G-O-N-D, and the word pageant is derived from the name of the vehicle that went from town to town to perform these plays, mystery plays, and miracle plays particularly. But after a while, as you could well imagine, once it got into the hands of the priests and the actors became members of the craft guilds or the merchant guilds, and they began to kind of make things more and more appealing to people and put some humor into it. For instance, one of the plays is about Noah and the ark, and so Noah is getting all the creatures into the wagon. I don't know exactly how they managed how many animals and people. There are only 8, I think, who supposed to go into the ark. But anyway, after time, it easily deteriorates and degenerates into farces. I mean, and so there's one scene in which Noah is pushing the elephants in, and the rhinoceroses, or rhinoceri, or whatever, into the ark. And finally, it gets his sons and daughters in, and it's time for him and his wife to go in. And his wife has become very large. And so the rain has started, and the lightning's flashing, and they've got to get things going. But Mrs. Noah can't get through the door. And it shows Noah using every means by which they can accomplish the purpose without too much success. So you get farces as well as very serious and very solemn all sorts of things. Well, the clock's telling me that I'm just about running out of time. Beauty. Art, the art is in the sculptures. We talked last time about the sculptures on the churches, and one of you were kind enough to bring me. You've been to Autun. I wouldn't have thought any of you. I bet there's not 3 people in here who's ever been to the cathedral in Autun in France. Anyway, there was a lady who was here last time, Peggy Lee. Peggy, you was here. Yeah, I want to give you your book back today. But Peggy had brought me to look at a book that she had bought when she went to Old Touch Cathedral and saw the sculptures of Christ's. Well, the sculptures part of the art, the illuminations of manuscripts, a very important form of art in the 12th century, which was done in the scriptoria in the monasteries. Scriptoria are the places where the monks copied books. You and I cannot imagine the importance of what these monks did from the time of St. Benedict in the 6th century, when the Benedictine monasteries were started, and the first big one in Monte Cassino, between Rome and Naples on that high hill, which was bombed in World War II. The Nazis hold up there, and finally the Allies had to bomb it. It was rebuilt since then, and I remember in 1970 visiting it and seeing it. Fortunately, they found the plans for the original monastery and rebuilt it according to those plans. But the scriptoria, it found in all the monasteries that one of the most important tasks of any monk is to spend time copying. Despite all the accuracy and devotion that they gave, I mean, there were many mistakes that would be made. They weren't all those significant mistakes, but a monk would look down and the candle would go out or something, and then he had to relight it, and when he'd come back, he'd maybe start on a couple lines down and leave out a couple of lines. Almost, I think, no ancient Greek, Latin classics were not copied. I mean, they were able to the monks were the ones who copied these manuscripts. Plato and Aristotle, and eventually you and I were able to read them. Then they would illustrate, again, for their own entertainment, also for the entertainment and amusement and pleasure of people who read them. They illuminated the manuscript. That is to say, the capital letters at the beginning of a verse, they would beautify that in many different colors of ink. And the stained glass windows that are later put in the Gothic cathedrals are often the reflections of the illuminations that are found in these manuscripts. And this is an extremely important form of art and beauty in the 12th century. Well, I'm going to wind things up. I've got more to say about the 12th century, but it's time, I think, to bring it to an end. The next century, as I told you, Pope Innocent III, around 1200, he is Pope until 1216. The most powerful pope in Western Europe. But about 100 years later, the very delicately balanced medieval civilization that the 12th century had ushered in was beginning to fragment. So by the early 14th century, the medieval civilized synthesis had come to an end, and you are entering into a much more secularized world that you found in the 12th and 13th century. One of the great medieval historians, a man named Norman Cantor, who wrote a book entitled The Civilization of the Middle Ages, the Civilization of the Middle Ages. When he comes to the end of his book, he tries to explain what happened. Why did medieval civilization come apart by the early 14th century? And in a very short paragraph, he puts it something like this. I'm not sure this is verbatim, but it's fairly close. He said that medieval civilization was the complex interpenetration of spirit and power of moral and material resources. That such a delicate compromise is very difficult to maintain, that it requires, if I can think of his adjectives here, it requires mature intelligence, sophisticated moderation, and what is it? And careful observation, careful, what I want to say, starts with a V. Careful.
Visualization.
Let's see, I'll read it. Probably the best thing to do. I don't know if I have it, but in any event, it's a very delicate relation between spirit and power, between moral and material resources, and that the enemies of such a delicately composed civilization are three categories: uncomprehending primitives, zealous, I do this thing backwards and forwards. The third category, well, the people who have zeal and who express that zeal regardless of what the consequences of expressing the zeal. And the socially irresponsible zealots. Okay? Uncomprehending primitives, socially irresponsible zealots, and neurotic simplifiers. He says these are the enemies of delicately balanced civilization. I used that text for my students in medieval history at VCU for several years, and they loved it. And in fact, one of my exam questions would be, in your judgment, on the basis of our study, would you give the examples of uncomprehending primitives, neurotic simplifiers, and socially irresponsible zealots? And I got some good answers. Peter Abelard, for instance, they said he looks like a socially irresponsible zealot. He's determined to go ahead with things and let the chips fall where they may. And then there were the people who just, William of Ockham, Ockham's razor, the simplest answer. Whether he's a simple neurotic or not, the guys who think that you can take a very complex society and reduce it to a very simple answer or solution. And I got some great answers from students, and then they want to know, okay, Professor, who are the socially irresponsible zealots and the neurotic simplifiers in our world today? And that was a pretty good one. And of course, in the 60s, you have a number of people to pick, and 70s and so on. I heard that Norman Cantor was going to give an address at William and Mary, and I asked students if they would like to go to the hearing. So the author of the textbook. And so we got together a bunch of cards, and kids were really interested in doing it. We all went down to William and Mary, and there was Norman Cantor himself giving his speech. And after in the question and answer period, fool that I was, I guess, I just said, Professor Cantor, we really enjoyed what you said as you ended your book about the uncomprehending primitives and the socially irresponsible zealots and the neurotic simplifiers. Who, in your opinion, in the Middle Ages would, what characters would fit those? And he didn't say anything for a minute, and he said, "Oh, hell, man," he said, "I have to finish that book somehow or other." And that's what I said. Well, I got to finish somehow or other, and so So, as they said in, Uncle Sam and Nicholas, the tale is, said, well done. So, all right. Before you go, I'm thinking, maybe next spring, in fact, I just thought it since, Ann told me about, we're gonna have another session. I'm thinking maybe, something like, personalities of the other Renaissance. The other Renaissance being the one that everybody thinks of when they think of a Renaissance. The one that starts with Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, the one that has Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael, and to maybe have do 3 of them for 5 sessions, and just do personalities of the other Renaissance. And one other announcement, and that is next Monday, we will not meet because our class is over, but next Monday at 11 o'clock, the Westminster Canterbury Richmond Men's Chorus is going to give a concert in anticipation of All Saints' Day. 11 o'clock in the theater. I will see you there. Okay, that's it.